Welcome to The Fountain with Ellie Thomas. The fountain is an image that I use in my work often to speak of our multidimensionality, to connect with the life, the living water flowing within us through mind, body, spirit, heart, and all. This show is a place where we explore it all, where we tap into wisdom that has surfaced through pain and joy and the fullness of our journeys. This podcast is a place to come and remember, to sink back into the living water that flows within you and to be guided back to your fountain, your fullness, your wholeness, and how to be with that as we navigate living as divine humans in this wild, wild world and this wild, wild journey. I'm so glad you're here. Let's dive in together and be refreshed and consoled by the water that wants to flow through. Hello, welcome back to the fountain. I have been reflecting a lot on my first month back to podcasting and sharing with you, and how special it's felt, how much fun I've had, how tickled I am to know you're listening and to receive messages about the podcast and how it's touching you, and it's touching me too in such beautiful ways. I feel so honored and excited to be sharing in this way and connecting with you. And I've reflected a little bit on my own love for podcasting, which has been around for many, many years now. Like before, I feel like I was listening to podcasts in 2013 and 2014 when I really didn't like my job and I needed to get through it. I listened to a crazy amount of podcasts, and over the years, I've listened to them for different reasons, but my greatest love for them comes down to just connecting with the human experience and learning about others and their pain and their beauty and their lives. And this is basically my passion in life in all ways. And I am so happy to be able to share my corner of this experience with you all this way, and to hopefully support and open you up to even more of your own. So thank you for being here as we come into the next month of the show, the second full month of the show. I also have been reflecting a lot on how I accidentally released the last episode the day before the fall equinox. And as I was realizing the potency of what I released and what I shared, I felt like it aligned so well with the season that was upon us and the arrival of fall. Fall is all about release and this kind of slow loosening and letting go that happens. And it's a process. As I look out my window now, everything is still completely green. Thankfully, I'm not quite ready for it to release yet, for the leaves to fall off the trees here. But we are entering into this observational process of literally seeing transformation, like the beginning of it, happen outside of us. And so it is, of course, a perfect season to begin to tune into how that transformation is happening inside us and to learn a little bit more about how to connect with that and what to look for. And I felt this invitation to just invite you in to this season more consciously, to really notice and be with the shedding. And we'll talk about why in a moment. This episode is all about understanding the different phases of transformation, or spheres of transformation. I'm still not quite sure how to perfectly call them, but this is basically like the observed Ellie flow process for transformation and how I meet and support people, but it's not something that's created by me. These are natural processes and cycles that are already happening within us, determined by nature. And it's very normal to think about cycles or rebirth or beginnings happening in springtime. And while they definitely do, I have a framework today to share with you that really allows us to see how the seasons before, the couple seasons in our lives before that, the spheres that we can be alive in, really prepare us to be able to feel and see into that rebirth when springtime comes. So, before I get too deep into this and it gets muddled and weird, I want to let you know that also I kind of just got the message with fall. Okay, this is the beautiful time. This is a beautiful time to invite people into this process, to support people in the natural shedding that's happening within them and support them in becoming conscious of it and making space for it in their lives. And I have been really excited about hosting some workshops for the podcast community and really everybody. But as listenership grows and the podcast is more well known, having a space to be able to move through some of these topics and conversations in a live setting has been such a beautiful idea and a beautiful focus of mine. And so this fall in October, I will be hosting the first two workshops that will be doing this. They're happening on October 11th and 25th. And the first one is going to be what I call a grief flow. And a grief flow is where we come into a space together and use guided connection and self inquiry and meditation that leads into a time where we allow our bodies to move to music, either very slowly or very quickly, whatever your energy is guiding you towards, and allowing us to tap into places of grief or pain within us that we then allow to be transmuted and moved with. And oftentimes, where we start in these grief flow workshops is not where we end. So at first, we may feel very stagnant and tight or closed off, and we just might end in this really calm, elevated place. And it's a really beautiful, magical experience. I will have the description below. You just come exactly as you are in a quiet place with some headphones on. And then afterwards, we'll have kind of a circle for any guidance or coaching or sharing anything that came up for you, any questions that are there, anything that still needs to be worked through. This is an incredibly transformative experience. It sounds super weird, and probably if you tried to imagine it in your mind, it would look super weird, but I've led them multiple times, and every time it is just so medicinal and very powerful. So I'd love to invite you to that. And the second workshop will be an embodied acceptance workshop. And in the first couple episodes of the podcast, I talked about acceptance and the importance of allowing ourselves to really come into embodied acceptance of this moment, which means we need to be able to release emotion, grief, sadness, fear, everything about how things are today versus how we wished them to be in order to be in this moment, or everything that's like, can I really accept this? Can I really allow this to be this good? Those sorts of questions, so that we can allow ourselves to fully be where we are. And that is the point from which the next thing can unfold. And embodied acceptance in general is one of the trickiest things, I think. And I'm just really excited to hold space for this process, because every time I tap into acceptance, which I'm tapping into more and more of it every day, and I need to guide myself into that. But also as I tap into it in bigger ways with bigger things happening in my life, or I notice this with clients too, as they're able to touch into a bigger sense of acceptance of just exactly where they are in this moment, even if it's not where they wanted to be, or if it's something totally different than what they thought it was going to be, but maybe it's fantastic. It can be hard to really feel yourself in it. And once you do tap into that place, it's just like everything opens. Our bodies open more, our ability to receive guidance, and also in the humanly realm to receive from others opens up. The pathways forward open up. There's just so much clarity and delight and awe and curiosity that can come from this place that really leads us forward. So that workshop will be on October 25th. I will have the one for the 11th posted very shortly to join, and then by the beginning of next week, the one for the 25th as well. They'll each be $44 to join, and I can't wait to embrace the season with you. And without further ado, I'm going to get to the topic of today more specifically. So today is all about what I call the Ellie flow process, or the 5 spheres of transformation. And I received this understanding of transformation in a divine download about 9 months ago after a really fun dinner out with friends. We went to this fabulous Mexican restaurant, and I totally forgot in the moment that one thing that I've struggled with on and off since my mom died has been acid reflux. And this is never something that I experienced before. It was something that was brought on by the stress of the first 6 months after she died, and probably the many years of stress before she died. And basically, as my system was trying to rebalance about 6 months after she died, I began having incredibly painful acid reflux for the first time in my life. And I have thankfully been able to find measures that are holistic that have really supported the healing of most of this. And so now it's to a point where on a day-to-day basis, I'm not thinking about the reflux at all. And usually, as long as I avoid super spicy things, or if I avoid alcohol, or just like really astringent acidic things, and I'm talking on an extreme level, then I'm good and I don't have to think about it very much. Well, when we went to this amazing Mexican place that was just playing around with a lot of flavors, and the food was beautifully vibrant, and I shared a margarita with my husband, and the food was really spicy. So I came home from this restaurant that night, and as we're arriving home, I'm starting to feel the impacts of the food, and I'm thinking, oh no, what did I just do? I totally forgot. And so I took as much aloe juice as I could, and I did everything that I could to really not set myself up for a hard night. But lo and behold, at 3 a.m, I woke up with ridiculously intense acid reflux, like some of the worst I have ever had. And as I'm waking up and dealing with this, my mind is racing with these incredible thoughts and understandings around how it is that I help people, what it is that I do. And before I know it, I'm pulling out my phone, just stream of conscious writing, trying to at the same time figure out if I need to get out of bed and what I can take to remedy this acid reflux. And I'm almost distracted by it because there is just so much information coming in, streaming through my hands onto my phone. I'm contemplating, should I get up? I don't want to wake my husband up. Should I get up and find a notepad? There's so much, so much. I probably spent about an hour writing and writing and writing. And what's coming through is clarity around what's happening in transformation, what is happening in my clients, what is the process that I'm meeting them in, what has happened for me. All of these areas, also like just clarity on how to present some of the gifts that I have around tapping into and working with emotion that promotes and supports healing. And so so much goodness. I'm just so excited as I'm receiving this. So maybe 4 a.m. comes along and the acid reflux is still really bad, and I get the urge to go downstairs and make myself a snack to help because it feels like the only thing that's going to help is eating. I don't know if that's real or not, but as I'm walking downstairs, I grab my notebook from my desk in my office and I set myself up at our countertop and I'm just scribbling and drawing. And this whole imagery of the flow of stages of almost like development within transformation are coming out. And I have created by the end of it, 45 minutes later, this incredible diagram that I have in front of me right now. And maybe I'll publish a picture of it with the show because it's a lot of fun and I can hardly read some of it now. But it was just an incredible thing to receive. It was just this feeling of, wow, this is it. These are the words. This is how to express and share this with others in a way that they can see themselves within this flow, within this framework, within this process, and identify what's going on and receive compassion and awareness, and then support and offer support to themselves, witnessing and acknowledgement. And I still don't have quite the perfect name for the emotional stewardship type process that I use to really get to the root of what I'm feeling and to meet myself in that. And I think that learning those tools while you are in the process of, these cycles of transformation is extremely supportive. And that will be something that we can dive into in a workshop in the coming season or have a podcast about soon. So today I really want to lay out these kind of 5 spheres. And why do I bounce between calling them cycles and phases and spheres? Well, at first I saw this as a complete cycle. And as I started to, in the weeks after I received them, really deepen into each one, I began to feel like, whoa, each of these is almost like a standalone sphere. And standalone sphere. And once it's activated in us, and once we become kind of consciously aware of it, it's running all the time. And it's not something that we just start and complete. It's not a checkbox on our path of transformation. It is something that is kind of continuously operating, and we can consciously come back to it and notice when it's reawakened or turned on again or heightened. And each of these layers, as they activate the next one, there can be mini cycles within each of these spheres and mini cycles within multiple of the spheres. And it can become really complex. And I like the idea of almost spheres or gears that kind of stack on top of each other and work together or create kind of a circle or a hole, but there's interplay between them. And the idea that they stay active is really important, because the truth about transformation is once we consciously come into a transformational process and allow that process to be underway, in my experience, it never stops. We become more attuned to it. We become more aware of how to work with ourselves and work with it. We become more delighted and enlightened by what's happening. And it's really something that I cherish in my life now, is the constant ebbs and flows of transformation. And it's important to not look at this as like an end, that like there's an end point or an end process. And another thing that I came to more clearly understand in the weeks and months after receiving this whole framework was that these things can be running and happening in our lives when we are not conscious of them. However, the depth and profundity of the change and the shifts happen when we enter into these processes from a different place. And that different place doesn't look like full consciousness, because we're not quite there yet. Usually, to me, maybe it's called like half awakened or half aware, half consciousness. And what really catalyzes this experience and catalyzes transformation is what I call a broken open moment, or I recently heard it referred to also as a rupture, which is maybe a better word. So some rupture in our life, something that breaks open what we thought life to be, who we are. I often like to think of my many broken open moments or kind of ruptures that led to my biggest breaking open. It's almost like having an egg and hitting it with the back of a spoon and seeing it crack, but it's not going to fall apart yet. And then in another place over time, it gets hit and cracked again. And there's quite a few places where maybe this egg is kind of ready to open and to crack fully, but it's not ooey and gooey and oozing out yet. And then some circumstance of life is created or happens that really hits the egg in the perfect place that just cracks it into, and all of the guts spill out. And I believe that that moment that happens in us is what catalyzes us and moves us into this process and allows us and asks us to become more conscious and to raise our consciousness in the process. So that broken open moment is really like the preview. It is the preface. It needs to happen. It is what sets everything up. And that is not something that is forced. That is another thing that's really important about this. We can choose to make change in our life, but organic, nature-based transformation happening within us happens within contexts often that we don't choose and don't desire. And that's really confusing. It means that it's often pretty messy. It's not something that we just get to say, oh, I don't like this part of myself, and now I'm choosing to be different and I'm going to take the steps to do so. We totally can do that in our lives. This is not exactly what I'm talking about today. However, maybe this framework is applicable to that experience as well. But as I've mentioned in other shows, this is a transformation where our soul is bursting through. It is asking to have space again. It is calling us back into alignment with greater parts of ourselves that we have often cut ourselves off from. And that rupture that is the broken open moment that splits the egg in two, in some way shatters our protective mechanisms or makes them not as functional. They don't work as well anymore. And that is really essential to allow us to really be able to feel into our core, into the depth of who we are, and to begin to explore and embrace. I also sometimes think of a broken open moment as like an earthquake that splits two pieces of land. You know, there's literally a fault line that will not go back together. I've often used the analogy as well with clients. If we rip a paper in two, we can try and tape that paper back together, put it next to each other, but that rip is never leaving. And there is no going back to being a full piece of paper, or we can't transform it back to what it was after we've ripped it. There's something new being created here. And I really want to be clear here. This is not about being broken. This is not about not being able to return to wholeness. I'm using this specifically as a metaphor and a visual to help you see how these broken open moments mark us. It's almost like a lightning bolt coming down and hitting a tree and splitting a tree. That tree is still complete, but it will never be the same. And the essence of a broken open moment is that they are the things that happen in our lives where when we speak to them and think about them and talk about them and look at them, we have this feeling of there is no going back. We might wish to return to how things were before, but we know deep down that we are forever changed by this. These can be relational ruptures. They can be diagnoses within our family or for ourselves. They can be deaths and loss. It can be leaving a certain job, leaving a homeland, leaving a state or a city. It can be making a decision because you don't have another choice and you have this feeling like, I can't do this anymore. This is not how I can live. This is not who I really am. I don't know what's in front of me, but something needs to change. There can be declarations that are conscious, and there can be moments where we are totally swept up in the pain of what's happening to us, a loved one, our homeland, and more. So once we've experienced this broken open moment, we are in time. For some people, this happens very quickly, and for some people, it happens after the shock wears off. We are ushered into the first stage or the first sphere, which is release. Now you're going to start to see how the importance of fall and shedding and letting go comes in. And the sphere of release is massive. It is the foundation for which everything else can occur. In release, and I know I'm slowing down a little bit here because as I'm beginning to touch into the energy of release, I'm feeling almost overwhelmed by its potency and its power and wanting to give you the perfect words to connect with that. And also, though it's so big, there probably aren't perfect words. Release is the way that we make space for what wants to come through. That is why it is so foundational. And it also is probably one of the most resisted things ever. Release is vulnerable. Release is scary. This can be tangible release, releasing of a life that we once lived, shutting down certain things in our lives, ending certain relationships, leaving homes, leaving jobs, burying a loved one. And it is also deeply emotional, and we almost enter into this internal death process as soon as we open to release. And release might be really knocking at our door for quite a few weeks, months, potentially even years, asking to be embraced. It really takes us saying, okay, I am willing to release, even though it is immensely painful, to allow this sphere to activate in our lives. This is a sphere that can come with an immense amount of tears. It can come once we feel safe in a safe and held space to let it come. It can come with things happening in the body, a shift in energy, a release of weight sometimes, the creation of an illness, just like when I talked about the acid reflux, when I really entered into the true release of everything that was happening and had happened after my mom died, it was 6 months later, 6 months after her death. And I had been powering myself through with an immense amount of caffeine up until that point. And then I just couldn't anymore. My body started to reject it. And there was release knocking at my door saying, honey, you've got to let go. You've got to let this grief come. You've got to let this release really happen in your body. And I really believe that the reflex was just this letting go of trying to control and be okay that came in this process where I just couldn't anymore. And really allowing myself to let what needed to run through my body to run through. The beginning stages of release feel like an unraveling that we have no control over, which is why it is so scary. It feels like everything that we once were, everything that we once knew life to be, is no longer. And this space for self-inquiry as the beginning, as the initial emotions are given space to move through, and this simultaneous process of letting go and space being created in the process happens. There is space and readiness for self-inquiry in a way that we have never experienced. This internal rebalancing begins. It's extremely vulnerable feeling. It feels like just layer upon layer is stripped away quickly or over time. Some people will tell you that in a moment's time or in a week's time, so much of them has been pulled away or died off. Other people can tell you that this process has happened in a very slow way, where each week, with a slow build or a reverse slow build over time, there is this peeling of the constructs of our lives and of ourself that are being pulled back, peeled off like an onion. And just like I spoke to in the episode about emotional release, this pairs perfectly with this sphere and this stage in the process and the journey. Because once we have allowed the release to really happen, once we have opened our heart doors to it and opened our minds to it and surrendered to it over and over and over again, and let things move from our body in the form of tears, in the form of movement, as we release energy in our physical lives and in our energetic beings, we slowly come to a moment of stillness. And this release allows us to tap into a deep calm and clarity that may not persist, but it's a different, very different moment than what we've been living in the weeks and months beforehand, in my experience. And again, this rebalancing begins, this ability to see things differently begins very slowly. It's like these turning of these knobs that are working at the perfect pace for you in your life. Nobody's pace for any of these stages of transformation or transformation in general are the same. And usually they take way longer than we want them to. Sometimes there are certain ones that come and go in a flash, and others that last what feels like a lifetime. And the turning point, or the kind of initiation, moving from the sphere of release into the second sphere, which we'll get into in a moment, is really this place of calm. This is our transition point. And as we allow the integration of the release to happen in our lives, which happens little by little as we allow ourselves to really realize and come into acceptance of everything, we are brought to sphere 2, which is often called the void or avoid. I also love to call it dancing with the unknown or dancing in the dark. And this sphere really represents winter, the depths of winter. And at first we enter in a void space, maybe saying things like, I don't know what's next. I don't know what's going to happen. We can also deeply resist the void space, partly because not knowing in our current culture today is even more vulnerable than release potentially. Being in deep awareness and relationship of the uncertainty in life, of the unknown, is extremely important and powerful. And it is also like, holy moly, what now? And just like winter arrives slowly and then deepens and then thaws, usually voids feel like that in our lives. Usually times of dancing in the unknown feel like, okay, I'm feeling okay. It's the first days of winter. As I always love to say, I love winter in the Midwest until January 1st. So the first potentially 2 to 5 weeks of it. And then after that, I'm ready for it to be done. So there is a slow, process, a lightness to it at the beginning. And then we usually settle into it and want to be beyond it as fast as possible. If you are somebody out there that is extremely comfortable basking in the dark of the unknown and dancing with it and being in the void, my hat is off to you. I have been in many, many void moments. Every time my tolerance and willingness to be there increases, I have grown a deep reverence for it and now do not try and rush it or be beyond it, usually, but actively accepting that I am in a void space in my life is something that I have needed to learn and still need to work with myself. And I think it wouldn't be a void if it wasn't somewhat uncomfortable. I don't think it's supposed to be comfortable. This is where, the decomposing of everything that we released is happening. This is, if you think about wintertime, the underground, the fertile preparation, the deep silence, the depths, everything is being prepared in such an unseen way that it often feels like in the void space, nothing is happening. We might feel lost. There are new waves of grief and release that can happen here. There's lots of grief in the void space for me. There is frustration and impatience. Oh, wow. Yeah, it is just a time when simultaneously so much is happening in the unseen, and yet nothing is happening in the seen. And it boggles us. And part of this magic is that as we allow the release to penetrate us on a deeper level, when we allow the truth of the letting go to hit us more deeply than what we can comprehend, it's almost as if our new internal vibration of authenticity begins to form. It's like this, this sphere is all vibrational. It's all energetic. Going back to the idea that we don't just start transformation in spring when there are new things popping up, but that the years or the months or the spheres before that time period have allowed that to happen. This is the time in this void space that everything that is vibrational that needs to come together in order to support what will come forth in the next phases starts to come together. This is an undeniable part of this process. Most of us would choose to skip it if we could, but I promise you that what happens on the other side will not be as rich or juicy without it. One of my specialties in my coaching practice has become supporting people through their times of dancing in the unknown or through their inner void spaces, helping them connect with what's happening, helping them continue to allow the release that is still ongoing, the remnants of the release to still happen, allowing them to tune into the fear that arises. So much fear arises, fear of uncertainty, fear of unknown, that is natural for humans. It is boggling, as I said, to our minds to allow ourselves to stay in this space without trying to just find a way out. Usually our mind is trying to find a way out and protect us. But the more that we can just week after week really sink in to the truth of this void and release those aspects, the more we can open to the beauty that is just around the corner. Now, I can't say how far that corner is from where you're standing at the time, but it is an incredibly powerful and unique thing to be able to be in your void and allow yourself to truly be in your void. I also believe that the void space is one of the spaces through which and in which we rebuild our relationship with ourselves. Oftentimes, one of the things we are asked to release, or that is released through us and in us, is our relationship with ourselves. And in order for what's to come through, we need to be in a more loving, more connected relationship with ourselves in order to allow that to really flourish and take root in our lives. And the void space is where a lot of that happens. So when I'm supporting somebody that's going through a void time, not only do we name it and release expectations, because sometimes energy is low, vision for life is often low, and trying to force those things doesn't help. I know that one of the great things out there in the world right now is really having a vision. And where are you focusing? What are you wanting to create in your life? And while that is extremely important, in deep void spaces, those things do not actually support what's wanting to happen on a deep level. And the time will come again for new vision. But as we have released usually our old vision, we are in this deep recalibration that needs space without so much pressure in order to fully do its thing. Going back to finding support in a void space, the support I've received and the support I offer really is about cultivating deep relationship with self, being exactly where you are, beginning to learn and become accustomed and adjust your nervous system and your ability to be with the rawness of who you are, because that is often what has been exposed in the release and is present in the void space. And there is a process here, depending on what your relationship is to that raw space of within yourself, that one might need to go through, of really coming into acceptance and love and curiosity and invitation and exploration of, again, all the parts of us that we have pushed away that are now here in our rawness with us. And we do not get to decide when our void ends. And just like the sphere of release, we can touch back into the void space at later dates. But usually, once we have gone through the initial void process from a conscious place, and once we have been in relationship to it and know what it feels like and can name it, and we have learned to kind of take our hands out and just let ourselves be. The void space is a great teacher of learning to just be, which is another reason why we can fight against it so much. As you know, I don't know what the forces of, love are that determine when it ends, and yet it does, even though we think it never will when we're in the middle of it. However, the ending is soft. It is not an abrupt shift. Between each of these stages, there is a variety of crescendos and decrescendos that move us in and out of them. And the void decrescendo I find to be extra long and extra slow usually, because the next sphere, the third sphere, is really one of transition. I call it emergence, and it is similar to the void space in that we can't see much happening outside of us. We can't see shifts taking place quite yet outside of us. However, different from the void space, we can feel that there is something happening within us. In the void, we don't know what's happening at all. It feels just dark completely. In emergence, it's like the inner light is slowly turning back on, and we can feel what I call the vibrational dance party, speaking again to what's happening beneath the earth in the wintertime. The microbes, the decomposing, all of the pieces that need to happen to create fertile ground for what's to come. The emergence is like the first thaws at the end of wintertime, where it's not quite spring, but we can feel that spring isn't that far away. And we can feel the heat begin to return in the sun. I call this the vibrational dance party. And we can feel the vibration of change happening within us. We can feel that shifts are coming, and yet still nothing is really visible. And just like the void space, we cannot bypass this step, and it can create a lot of impatience. It can also create a lot of hope and joy. And there is a return of awe and wonder that comes back to us in this phase, where we are like, whoa, I can feel things are brewing deep within. What will they look like? What will they be like? When will they arrive? it begins to reactivate a new sense of life. It's like as we're coming out of the deep, simple, just beingness of the void, this reactivation of how we're going to see and interact with life, nature, everything around us, and with ourselves is being reborn in the vibrational state in this time of emergence. I have written down here, in the emergence, we can feel the energy brewing beneath the surface. The frequency is palpable, and even though form isn't yet, we begin to feel renewed hope. It's also really important that I say this. Release and void are the two initial stages of this framework and this process. Emergence being the third stage and third of 5, it is like the juicy middle, and it marks a changing point between darker, deeper inner places and this movement from just those deeper inner places up out to the world again. And again, it is a slow transition for some. And another really important thing to say is that you may loop between and be in just a shorter cycle of release, void, and emergence, release, void, and emergence over and over again for a long time before you move to stages 4 and 5. So for some, it may be necessary in order to go to the depth that's needed to go to, or in order to release the things that are needed to be released in a multidimensional way, like layer after layer. We may need to release a little bit, enter a void, move into emergence when it's time, and from emergence, be brought back to release. Like the emergence gives just enough hope and just enough energy to provide kind of the reassurance to our system and the sustainability, like, okay, at some point we are going to come out of this. And from that security and that safety, it doesn't always, but it can support us in being able and willing to release more. And in that circumstance, we would be kind of ushered back into release, and we would begin to complete or move through the spheres again. This is why the word completion, which I almost just said, is so important to leave out, because this is a non-linear process. Everything on my page in front of me is circles and, curved lines, and there's so much fluidity and flow, and it's really just about surrendering to your own process and your own energy and moving with how these want to move through and how they are guiding you in your life. Another one of the incredibly beautiful practices of deep coaching that I studied in 2020 is this practice of tapping into what wants to happen. And this is something that now I'm very practiced at, and I love being in the deep sensing and deep listening with my clients and also with myself of what wants to happen here. And when we can ask ourselves that question, especially in the stage of emergence, but really throughout the entire process, what wants to happen here? What's guiding me? What is the natural inkling? What is the natural movement of my energy? The more we can trust and surrender to that, the more natural this process will be. It will still be fruitful, whether you fight against it or not. It might just take a little longer. But for me, fighting against things and fighting against how things were that I wished were different is a huge soul process for me. And so if that's alive for you, that might be what's happening for you too, or your version of it. So what comes next? As we begin to open to wonder and awe and curiosity in emergence and become a little bit more comfortable with it and begin to enjoy it slowly, that really early spring turns into a season of true spring where we're exiting the void more and more. Again, we're instead of decrescendoing here, we're almost like crescendoing from emergence into this next sphere, which I call the I am alive sphere. And the I am alive sphere is this crescendo back into life, but it's slow and gentle for most people. It's not like spring is here and the snap of a finger. You can really be in the overlap of emergence coming into the I am alive sphere. The in between, the integration of those two, there are no hard lines here. It is very subtle, but the shift is, instead of just feeling that vibrational dance part, we begin to feel the grounding of this sensation of I am here. And in that grounding, just in spring, as we look to the ground and we see things beginning to sprout and pop and new greenery, and as we look above us and begin to see buds on trees, we begin to see in our lives the buds and the sprouts of the new things that have been in cultivation during the last spheres. And the I am alive sphere, when we arrive to it, is a deep breath of relief. Oh, it just is like, okay, I made it. I can take a moment to just put my hand on my heart and witness, like, this has been a journey and I am still alive. I am here. And we can feel our feet just like on the ground. And when we open our eyes, we have this sensation of knowing the depth and the pain that we've moved through, and also opening to our eyes to all of the budding beauty all around us. I have written down with this phase, noticeable changes in self and feeling more and more whole. This is exciting. This is the beginning of our rebirth. And we get to explore life from this new place. This is like get out of your car and dance in delight sort of feeling. This is like, oh my God, the amount of relief and just the sense of possibility that sprouts from here is incredible. You may shed tears of perseverance and also just share laughter and burst out in laughter for the pure joy of being alive. And this is the sphere of rebirth. Nothing says it better than that. Who you have become through the process that you have walked through is now present in your life. You aren't necessarily like fully there yet, but you're there enough that you just are delighted. Nothing could be better than the feeling of this. It's like, oh, finally, thank you. That's the feeling it gives me to think about it. And it's also really important to think about I am alive in a progressive season, just like we have the rest. You know, we've talked about the many stages of release and the ways that might look and feel like, if we think about the very beginning of fall, where the green's still on the trees, but we're contemplating that they will fall soon. And then we get into pure autumn, and then we begin to see the release and winter arrive slowly. And here in the I am alive stage, we are moving from springtime in its purity, in its essence, and into early summer. And so you really get to be in this process. Again, all of these spheres move at processes that are perfectly attuned to you and what you're needing and who you are. And so when we're in the I am alive, we're starting with, oh, there's, we're finally seeing these new sprouts after feeling them vibrationally. We're seeing them sprout. We're seeing them come to life outside of us. We're feeling ourselves come to life in a new way. And we get to move through this process from early spring all up until early summer. And so there's an incredible sense of growth and deepening into the sense of aliveness and vibrancy that is available here that happens over time. This is not, again, like, I think I've expressed this enough, but I also feel like I can't express it enough. This is not a one and done moment. The moment of rejoicing and like bursting out of your car in, hallelujah mode, that might be the initial piece of this. But there's so much more. And the part about getting to explore life from this new place. That's what this is all about once we enter into it. So from here, we approach the fifth stage, which now you're starting to probably get a vision or get a hold of, thinking of, okay, we've moved from fall all the way from early summer. And so this next stage I call the here I am stage. And this stage to me represents kind of like July and August into the beginnings of September, into the ultimate harvest moment of summer. And in July and August, I just think of summer as like, here I am. I am in full bloom, in full explosion, but in the most regal of ways, in the most grounded of ways. And this is exactly what this is. When we have entered this stage, it means we have entered into the embodiment of who we are now. We are moving through the world in this new form, in this new way, in this new place. The things that we worked on in the void space and that we felt emerging are so part of us, we're not even thinking about it anymore. We're seeing things differently. And this is really where the sense of a fountain and feeling our fountain begins to come alive. Things are flowing through us that we want to offer to the world. We feel so comfortable and secure in knowing who we are and how that impacts people in our lives and the world. And we're continuing to grow in that, of course, but we're also finally feeling more secure in who we are after walking a really brave and courageous journey. This is like, I don't know, I get a soft smile to my face when I think of this sphere. It feels so natural and like we can just take everything in differently and offer so much differently. And this is where the authenticity of who we are feels so natural to us. To be in the expression of that feels so natural. Of course, as I mentioned, we are always growing. We might have moved through this process in a massive life-changing way, and we might be moving through parts of it or retouching into other spheres over and over and over again for the rest of our lives. I also think it's really important to talk about, when we get to the here I am place and we've had to let go of things and new life is coming into form, it can require its own type of grieving process because, again, we might be coming into acceptance in a new way. And we might be seeing loss and the things we had to let go of from a different lens. We might feel lonely here too, because I don't know about you, but I am the one that goes first mostly in my life, meaning that I lead the way. I'm not trying to, but that's just who I've been called to be in this life. And it often means that a lot of people have not yet gone through this process yet. And I have been called to, and I'm sure you will too, be called to offer deep compassion and just acceptance of seeing where that person is. But it can still feel lonely being in this new here I am place and not necessarily feeling like anyone else or everyone else is there with you yet. Do I believe that they are coming in their own way and on their own time? Absolutely. And also, this is a time of really just sinking into and beginning to trust the here I am, this is who I am, more and more as your process continues. Ultimately, I don't like to glorify any sphere because, just like I mentioned at the beginning, they all work together, they're all connected. And the loneliness or the re-looking at loss from a different place or kind of the conclusion of the cycle can bring up its own, mini next cycle that can happen. It's also very normal to, just like we could cycle through release and the void space and emergence together for a long time, it's also very normal to cycle from emergence to I am alive to here I am and back to emergence again. And to be in the cycle of a little part of us being in emergence and then the I am alive and okay, here I am sinking into that. And then that happening again with all of the different pieces and parts of us that we had to let go. So it really depends on your personal journey. And if you were prompted through your broken open moment to, release everything, this is not everything, but this felt like it happened to me. Like so much of my old life, even though doesn't look that different now, I really felt like I had to let go of it energetically after my mom died. And I spent a lot of time in the release and in the void and in emergence and just cycling between the three of those for a long time. Like, I don't know, over a year. And the emergence, as I mentioned before, gave me enough hope to keep going and keep trusting. And another really important part of this is, and something that we develop in the void space as I'm working with people is, a practice of prayer, a connection with the divine, a connection with the unknown, a practice of surrender. And since I spent so much time in those first three spheres, when I got to the later spheres, I really looped for a long time also between emergence, I am alive, and here I am. And so it was like each little part of me that I had to let go in the release, I got to go through the process of moving from emergence to I am alive to here I am within myself for each part of that. And it took a long time to feel like my whole being really arrived to here I am. I'd be in it for a week or a couple days or a month. I'd have glimpses of it. And then something would take me right back to touch into release, to touch into the void, and to land in emergence, spend some time there, and slowly move to I am alive again. So this second part of the cycle can also be just a really important place to let yourself be. I wrote down in my drawing a mini lap. And the mini lap really allows it to be this really powerful place of like deepened embodiment and integration when we can just let it happen at the pace it needs to happen at, and with the parts of us that need to happen first so that later parts can come later on. So that is the complete exploration so far. I'm sure there's more to add with time of this 5 spheres of transformation, or the LA flow process and cycle. And I trust that the understanding of this and kind of the energy of this will deepen with time for you. I'll rename them now just to conclude. Release, void or dancing in the unknown. Emergence is number 3. I am alive. And then here I am. And again, release goes with fall. The void and the unknown is the arrival of winter and the depths and darkness of winter. As we move into kind of anticipating spring, emergence becomes present. As we touch into true spring, I am alive arrives. And then we enter into full blooming summer and we can say, here I am. And then we can complete the whole thing all over again, or we can have, mini cycles within them, mini loops within them, and we can touch into each of them and dance in and out of each of these spheres that are now activated in our process for the rest of our life. I also think it's really fascinating to throw out there. I've had this happen with most of my clients, that they arrive to me to work together before their broken moment even happens, or amidst their broken moment when they haven't really sat with the intensity and severity of what this means for their life. And it is just so incredibly beautiful and cool to see how people are guided to the support that they need, whether that's working with me or something else in your life, right in the perfect timing to be able to move with this process, however it's arriving for you and however it's arising for you. And it is one of the most cool and humbling and joyous parts of my work to just allow people to arrive consciously or unconsciously and then see how all of this begins to unfold. And so oftentimes, while this might really support people that have gone through this already and to begin to name and really claim this sphere that you're sitting in right now, it's also not something that needs to be hyper conscious and hyper focused on until it's there. And you will know when it's there. And you will come back to this, or you will hear this for the first time and be like, oh, this is exactly where I am. And this is what's happening. And wow. And when we allow ourselves to receive this information and to see it with such clarity, it opens up permission for us to really live deeply the process and to be changed by what is meant to change us. And before we close, I would just like to give a moment for you to come into reflection with yourself after listening to this and just ask, how does this relate to me and what I'm moving through in my life? Where do I see myself if these spheres are activated for me? Which one am I moving in right now? Where does it offer healing and reassurance and permission and hope and grace? Oh, grace to be in it. This is something that brings me so much energy to talk about, as you could probably feel, and I can't wait to see how it wants to keep teaching and guiding me and the people that I work with and the podcasts I share in all the ways. And I hope that it offers you so much grace and permission and encouragement and reassurance. I think I've said these words a lot today, but really, I would just invite you to sink into all of them, whatever reaches you. And you may need to listen to this again or want to talk about it again, or it may be on your mind for a while, and just take your time and let it integrate. And if you have questions, reach out. I'd love to hear them. I'd love to hear where you find yourself. And another thing that I wanted to mention is the meditation that I posted right after the last episode. I believe it's called the meditation for emotional release, is an amazing meditation for spheres 1 and 2, for release and the void space. And I will post in the coming days, I'll give you some time to sink into this and to listen more. And then I will post in the coming days another meditation that will be really helpful for getting to know your energy that's coming up and arising in the emergence. And sometimes just having the anchor of a connection to yourself, a practice that guides you in that time frame, can be so helpful to continue to surrender to the process and to be fully in it. So keep your eyes peeled for that. I am so glad people are loving the meditations, and there's so much more I could say, and I feel like we are complete. And so I'm just going to put my hand on my heart, say thank you for listening, and I can't wait to be back with you soon. Thank you so much for listening to The Fountain. Please take a moment to rate and review the show and to send it along to a friend that comes to heart or mind. I'd also love to hear what came up for you and your experience listening to the most recent episodes. So reach out via your podcast app or send me an email. And if you'd like to book your first session or explore working together more, find me at ellieflow.com.